the truck that carried an army to victory in WW2, December 17, 1944, the Ardennes. The air hung thick with exhaust and freezing fog as the forest of fir and pine shuddered beneath the thunder of German armor. A desperate American convoy, jeeps, half-tracks, and open-bed trucks, struggled through the narrow roads near St. Vith. Engines groaned in protest. Tires spun on the icy mud. Somewhere ahead, artillery shells screamed from unseen batteries ripping through the haze. The men crouched low in the backs of their trucks, rifles clenched tight, breath-forming clouds in the frigid air. Every mile felt like a death sentence. After-action report 7th Armored Division, Deck 1944. Yet among the chaos, one vehicle seemed almost unbothered. Its 6 wheels churned through snow where others bogged down. Its engine, a humble inline-6, coughed but never quit. Soldiers clung to its wooden rails as it climbed a ridge that seemed impassable to everything else. When it crested the hill, its silhouette against the dawn revealed no tank, no half-track, just a truck. The GMC CCKW-2 1-2-ton, the Deuce and a Half, a workhorse of steel and sweat that generals once dismissed as unremarkable. U.S. Army Motor Transport Log 1944. For the German forward units, the Americans seem to appear from nowhere. They are everywhere, one Wehrmacht officer wrote, bewildered by the endless flow of supply vehicles that defied weather, distance, and logic. Bundesarchiv Wehrmacht Logistics Diary, Jan 1945. The secret wasn't a new tank or superweapon. It was the machine that kept those weapons fed, fueled, and moving, the humble truck that turned industrial might into unstoppable motion. To understand its quiet dominance, one must step back from the frozen roads of Belgium to the heart of America's war machine. By 1940, Europe was burning. France had fallen, and Britain clung to survival. The United States was still officially neutral, but watching closely. Its generals, trained in horse-drawn warfare and Depression-era frugality, placed their faith in tanks and artillery. Trucks were considered secondary, a logistical accessory, not a weapon. U.S. Army Quartermaster General's Memo 1940, but war was changing. In Poland and France, the Wehrmacht's blitzkrieg had shown what mobility meant. The Germans used every vehicle they could muster, Opel Blitz trucks, captured French lorries, to move men faster than defenders could react. America's planners took note. Some saw the future clearly. If Germany's power came from speed, America would need mobility on a scale no army had ever attempted. War Department Analysis 1941. Enter the Quartermaster Corps and a group of unsung engineers from Yellow Truck and Coach, a division of General Motors. They envisioned a truck not for city streets but for continents. A vehicle that could haul 3 tons on pavement or 2.5 through mud, climb a 60% grade, cross rivers, and keep pace with armored divisions. It had to be simple enough for a farmhand to fix with a wrench and a prayer. And it had to be built in the tens of thousands. GM Engineering Journal, 1941. In 1941, as America mobilized, the CCKW went into production. Its name, CCKW, was bureaucratic. C for 1941 design, C for conventional cab, K for all-wheel drive, W for tandem rear axles. But to the men who drove it, it became the Deuce and a Half. The truck weighed nearly 6,000 pounds empty, carried loads of ammunition, fuel, and men across every climate on Earth. At its heart beat a GMC 270 cubic-inch inline-6, producing 91 horsepower, modest yet unstoppable. Technical Manual TM 9801, 1942, the first units rolled into service with the U.S. Army just months before Pearl Harbor. When war came, the trucks multiplied like an industrial tide. Detroit, St. Louis, Pontiac, and Oakland poured out nearly 1 million of them before the war's end. Assembly lines blurred night into day. Rosie the Riveter wasn't just building bombers. She was riveting truck frames, wiring dashboards, fitting transfer cases. Office of War Production Report 1943. America's greatest secret weapon wasn't hidden in a lab. It rolled off factory lines by the hundreds every hour. By 1943, the CCKW had become the backbone of the Allied advance. In North Africa, they carried the lifeblood of the war, fuel and food, across hundreds of miles of sand. When the tanks ran dry, the trucks brought salvation. In Sicily and Italy, they climbed mountains that mules once feared. In France, they transformed roads choked with rubble into arteries of power. Where the trucks go, victory follows, one British observer noted dryly. British Combined Operations Report, 1943. But few commanders understood how vital the trucks truly were. General George S. Patton, the very embodiment of armored warfare, once scoffed at the idea of logistics limiting his advance. He was forced to reconsider in the summer of 1944. As his Third Army roared out of Normandy, his tanks consumed gasoline faster than any supply line could deliver it. But the CCKWs answered the call. Thousands of them formed the Red Ball Express, a relentless convoy network running from the beaches of Normandy to the front lines 24 hours a day. U.S. Army Transportation Corps Report, AUG 1944. At its peak, one truck left the depot every 20 seconds, headlights covered, engines droning in endless rhythm through rain and dust. African-American drivers, many from segregated units, manned most of the wheels, their bravery seldom recorded, their endurance unmatched. They drove through sniper fire, air raids, and exhaustion. Without the trucks, Eisenhower later said, we could not have won. Eisenhower Papers, 1946. Still, even as they performed miracles on wheels, the trucks remained unglamorous. Generals spoke of tanks and planes, historians of battles and heroes. Yet behind every victory was a road paved in tire tracks. Each artillery shell, ration box, and wounded soldier owed its movement to this uncelebrated machine. U.S. Strategic Mobility Survey, 1945, and now in December 1944, as the German Ardennes offensive struck like a frozen hammer, the CCKW once again became the difference between collapse and survival. German panzers had cut through thin American lines, isolating units, starving them of fuel and ammunition. The weather grounded Allied planes. Roads vanished under snowdrifts. It should have been the end. But across the battered Ardennes, the trucks rolled on, sometimes chained together, headlights off, following only the faint red glow of the tailgate ahead. 9th Army Logistics Log, Deck 1944. Soldiers watched them rumble past in disbelief, convoys stretching for miles, each carrying the supplies that meant life or death. Engines sputtered, brakes screamed, and yet they kept moving. Their drivers, frostbitten and sleepless, gripped the wheel with hands that could barely feel. We drove till the gas froze, one recalled, but the trucks never quit. What the Germans couldn't see was the invisible machine behind these trucks, an entire logistics ecosystem, fuel depots, mechanics, dispatchers, road engineers that transformed the CCKW into something far more than metal and wheels. It was a lifeline of civilization pushing through barbarity, a mobile artery of freedom. Transportation Command Field Memo, Deck 1944. In that frozen December, America's generals finally saw it clearly. The weapon they had ignored had become their salvation, and as the thunder of engines echoed through the Ardennes night, the truth emerged from the snow and smoke. This wasn't just a truck, it was the engine of victory, and in the months that followed, it would prove that wars are not only won by the men who fight, but by the machines that carry them there. In the cold dawn of January 1945, the fog lifted over a battered Belgian crossroads. Dozens of trucks idled in a frozen queue, exhaust plumes rising like ghostly columns into the grey sky. Mechanics moved among them, sleeves rolled to the elbow, hands blackened with oil and frostbite. A corporal shouted over the roar of engines, "Keep 'em moving!" These weren't glamorous machines, but the veins of an army stretched thin over the shattered continent. The CCKW-2 1-2-ton truck, GMC's unassuming masterpiece, was now the difference between starvation and momentum. 9th Army Logistics Report, Jan 1945. The Allies had learned the hard way that victory was not just about strategy, it was about supply. For every rifle fired, 10 trucks had to roll. For every tank that advanced, 20 CCKWs had to follow with gasoline, shells, and food. The deuce and a half had become the pulse of an army too vast to feed by rail, too fast to rest. And at the heart of this miracle stood a fusion of American industry and engineering brilliance that stunned even its own generals. War Department Engineering Summary, 1945. The secret to the truck's dominance was its design simplicity, its genius hidden beneath layers of steel and grease. The CCKW's all-wheel drive system distributed torque through a 2-speed transfer case that allowed each axle to grip the earth like a claw. Its 6.6 drivetrain, designed by engineer Oliver K. Kelly at General Motors, could pull 7,500 pounds up steep European grades or crawl through the quagmires of Burma. Technical Manual TM 9801, 42. The frame flexed under load without cracking, an innovation made possible by heat-treated steel that combined tensile strength with spring resilience. GM Metallurgical Bulletin 1943. Every nut and bolt of the CCKW had a purpose. Its dual rear axles, driven by Timken differentials, allowed the truck to bear immense weight without losing traction. The open cab variant, favored in Europe, reduced weight and improved visibility for convoy drivers under blackout conditions. The truck's 270 cubic inch inline-six engine, while modest on paper, delivered unmatched reliability. Field tests showed that even after running 400 miles with minimal oil, it would not seize. Ordnance Department Field Test Report, 1943. For an army on the move, reliability was life. To support the advancing Allied front, engineers and logisticians created a supply route of unimaginable scale. The Red Ball Express, an endless convoy of more than 6,000 vehicles, 75% of them CCKWs, moved 12,500 tons of supplies every day from Normandy's beaches to the front lines. The trucks ran 24 hours a day, headlights dimmed, over routes marked by red-painted signs nailed to trees and fences. Transportation Corps Operational Summary, Sept. 1944. Drivers often slept in their seats, engines never cooling, as the convoys thundered eastward in a symphony of steel and exhaustion. Enemy intelligence struggled to comprehend how the Americans kept their armies fed, despite distances that should have crippled them. A captured German colonel interrogated after the war reportedly said, "We destroyed your tanks, your roads, your bridges, but still you came. Your trucks made new roads where none existed." U.S. Army Interrogation Summary, 1945. Behind the front lines, the quiet heroes of logistics worked around the clock. Mechanics in makeshift depots reassembled broken axles from scrap, welded frames in open fields, and fashioned parts from wrecks. Women in Detroit assembled fuel pumps and brake cylinders by the millions. Civilian engineers reimagined production lines to churn out 8,000 trucks a month, an industrial miracle that no Axis power could match. Office of War Production, Industrial Output Report, to 1943. Even so, the CCKW's greatest test came during the Battle of the Bulge. The German offensive cut off key routes through the Ardennes, trapping units and starving them of supplies. Convoys were forced to reroute over primitive forest trails, frozen creeks and enemy-held territory. The CCKW's low-range gearing and rugged suspension turned what should have been impossible into barely survivable. Truck columns slogged through snow so deep it reached the fenders, engines roaring as chains bit into the ice. 12th Army Group Supply Log, Deck 1944. The trucks carried fuel to tanks that would counterattack, ammunition to Bastogne's defenders, and food to men who had eaten nothing warm for days. On December 23, 1944, under a brief break in the clouds, a convoy of 50 CCKWs from the 3rd Armored Division rumbled through the fog toward Bastogne. German artillery thundered, and 2 trucks were hit, their cargo igniting into a fireball that lit the forest in orange flame. The rest pressed on, engines screaming, tires shredded but moving still. By nightfall, they had delivered 50,000 gallons of gasoline and hundreds of artillery rounds, just enough to keep the American counterattack alive. 3rd Armored Division Field Journal, Deck 1944. Without those trucks, Bastogne might have fallen. Without Bastogne, the Ardennes might have broken the Allied front. The truck's adaptability also allowed it to serve in every imaginable role: troop carrier, ambulance, fuel tanker, and even mobile anti-aircraft platform. In Italy, engineers fitted CCKWs with quad 50 caliber turrets, forming meat choppers that shredded Luftwaffe strafers in seconds. Air Defense Command Memo 1943. In the Pacific, the same trucks were fitted with snorkels to ford rivers and coral lagoons. They hauled pontoon bridges, radar masts, and mobile kitchens. Each variant carried the same heartbeat, the engine that refused to die. Technicians from General Motors and the Quartermaster Corps worked tirelessly to ensure spare parts reached every theater. Kits containing gaskets, filters, spark plugs, and bearings were packed into wooden crates and shipped worldwide. Field manuals written in plain English taught soldiers with no mechanical training to rebuild engines in the mud. TM 9801 Maintenance Addendum, 1943. This democratization of maintenance, making every soldier a mechanic, was as revolutionary as the truck itself. Even as Germany's vaunted engineering produced monsters like the Tiger tank, its logistics collapsed under their weight. Each Tiger required 16 gallons of fuel for every mile. The CCKW could move 5 tons across that same mile for half the fuel. U.S. Fuel Efficiency Report 1944. The contrast was brutal. Where the Wehrmacht relied on brilliance, the Americans relied on balance, an elegant efficiency that multiplied power instead of consuming it. By early 1945, Allied momentum was unstoppable. The CCKWs pushed across the Rhine, crossing pontoon bridges as tanks roared ahead toward Cologne. In their wake followed miles of trucks hauling supplies in perfect rhythm. Soldiers joked that if the trucks ever stopped, the war would stop too, and they weren't wrong. First Army Operations Summary, March 1945. Eisenhower himself would later call the 212-ton truck the most important piece of equipment in the European theater. Eisenhower Papers, 1946. On the Eastern Front, German soldiers found the burned hulks of CCKWs along every captured road, mute evidence of an army that fought not just with courage, but with motion. One Wehrmacht mechanic wrote bitterly, "They had more trucks than we had bullets." Bundesarchive, Soldier Correspondence, 1945. By war's end, over 812,000 CCKWs had been produced, each one a link in the vast chain that stretched from American factories to the heart of Europe. The machine America's generals once ignored had become the engine of victory itself, its tires marking the very route to Berlin. Yet the true story of the CCKW wasn't just about machines or steel. It was about a philosophy of war, a realization that strength lies not in a single weapon, but in the system that sustains it. The truck, simple yet indomitable, proved that logistics could be as decisive as any battlefield tactic. U.S. Army Mobility Doctrine Draft 1946. And as the smoke cleared over Europe, the generals who had once dismissed the truck as mere transport now looked upon it with reverence. Because when the tanks ran dry, when the bombers grounded, when men froze and starved in the Ardennes, it was the truck that carried hope forward. 1 gallon, 1 mile, 1 victory at a time. Spring, 1945. The Rhine River. As dawn broke over the shattered bridges of Remagen, the air trembled with the growl of engines. From the western bank, an unending column of olive-drab trucks began to move. Fenders dented, mud-caked, engines coughing through exhaustion. The pontoon bridge ahead swayed under the weight of steel and history. Tankers rumbled across, artillery followed, and behind them came the heartbeat of the American Army, the CCKW convoys. Each truck carried 5 tons of supplies, and each mile it crossed was another nail in the coffin of the Third Reich. First Army After Action Report, March 1945. In that moment, the full scale of America's logistical triumph revealed itself. Every can of fuel, every loaf of bread, every shell fired into the ruins of Cologne or Frankfurt had traveled thousands of miles, from Midwestern factories to Atlantic ports, across U-boat-infested seas, through the mud of Normandy, and finally into the heart of enemy territory. And the vehicle that bore this burden, the one that generals had once overlooked, had become the unheralded architect of victory. U.S. Strategic Logistics Review, 1946. It wasn't just that the CCKW delivered supplies, it delivered confidence. Soldiers who saw the olive-drab trucks arriving through sleet or smoke knew they weren't forgotten. "If the trucks are coming," one GI said, "the fight isn't over." In the field hospitals, CCKWs converted into ambulances carried the wounded through shell fire. In devastated towns, they brought blankets and bread to civilians, huddled among the rubble. For the men of the Allied armies, the trucks weren't just transport. They were proof that someone, somewhere, was still fighting for them. Medical Corps Transport Memo, 1945. The power of logistics reshaped the very nature of war. Before 1944, battles had been fought for ground. Now, they were fought for mobility. A tank without gasoline was just a steel coffin. A rifle without ammunition was a stick, but a working truck, filled with fuel, food, and courage, was a force multiplier greater than any general could command. Army Mobility Doctrine Report, 1945. It was this realization that transformed the Allied advance from a slow push to an unstoppable flood. "We didn't outfight the Germans," one officer reflected. "We outmoved them." Psychologically, the impact was profound. German morale, already strained, began to collapse as soldiers watched the endless streams of American vehicles moving freely through landscapes their own logistics could no longer reach. The Wehrmacht, bled dry of fuel and spare parts, was paralyzed. Abandoned panzers littered the roadsides, monuments to an army whose engineering brilliance could not overcome its logistical starvation. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey 1946. Captured diaries spoke of despair. "They have so much. Even their trucks seem endless." Bundesarchiv Infantry Diary, April 1945. On the Allied side, the trucks inspired a different emotion, faith. Crews gave their CCKWs nicknames: Old Betty, the Iron Mule, Faithful Mary. Mechanics treated them like comrades, knowing a seized gearbox could stall an entire offensive. The bond between driver and machine was personal, almost reverent. "She got us home," one soldier said, patting his truck's hood as if it were alive. In a war defined by machines, the CCKW became the most human of them all. Oral History Collection, U.S. Army Transportation Museum. Behind the lines, factories continued their tireless rhythm. From 1942 to 1945, American workers, men and women alike, produced an average of 22 trucks every hour. Each one was tested, inspected, and shipped out within days. The production network was so efficient that spare parts reached the front faster than field requests could be written. This logistical perfection owed much to men like Alfred P. Sloan and Charles Kettering of General Motors, who streamlined assembly methods that later defined post-war manufacturing. Office of War Production Report 1945. In this sense, every factory worker became a soldier. Every wrench turned an act of resistance against tyranny. When victory finally came, the legacy of the CCKW stretched far beyond the battlefield. Across Europe, Asia, and the Pacific, millions of these trucks remained in service. They rebuilt what they had once helped destroy, hauling food to starving cities, carrying refugees home, transporting cement and timber for reconstruction. In France and Italy, entire national economies ran on surplus American trucks long after the war. Marshall Plan Supply Report 1948. Even the Soviet Union received thousands under Lend-Lease, using them to move supplies across Siberia. "It was the truck that fed the Red Army," one Russian officer admitted. Soviet Lend-Lease Records 1946. The psychological transformation of warfare was equally profound. Before the CCKW, armies moved as masses of men. Afterward, they moved as networks, interconnected, mechanized, and self-sustaining. The doctrine of modern logistics was born not in a general's office, but in the cab of a mud-splattered truck grinding up a French hillside. Post-War Army Doctrine Study, 1947. The idea that mobility equals power would shape every major conflict that followed, from Korea to the Gulf War, where supply convoys once again proved that speed and reliability could outmatch firepower alone. The CCKW also planted the seeds of an industrial military partnership that would define the Cold War. The same factories that built wartime trucks evolved into suppliers of atomic-era logistics, missile carriers, radar platforms, and mobile command centers. Engineers who had perfected field repair kits in Europe went on to design modular vehicles for the space age. Department of Defense Engineering Memo, 1952. The philosophy endured: build it simple, make it rugged, and ensure it can be fixed by the hands of those who use it. Yet for all its triumphs, the CCKW's legacy carried a quieter truth. War's greatest victories are often born of humility. The truck never appeared in propaganda posters. It had no soaring wings, no cannon, no glamour, but it gave life to every other machine. It was the artery of democracy, pumping across continents to keep liberty alive. The line between survival and starvation, one historian later wrote, was drawn by a truck tire. U.S. Strategic Mobility Study, 1950. As decades passed, the deuce and a half became a relic of history, but never forgotten. In the jungles of Vietnam, its descendants, the M35 series, bore the same frame, the same spirit, the same unbreakable heart. Soldiers who had never seen Europe still called it by its father's name, the Deuce. They trusted it as their grandfathers had. Army Transportation Heritage Report, 1968. Today, the sound of a CCKW engine turning over in a museum or parade carries an echo of all those nights when its rumble meant salvation. For veterans, it's not just nostalgia, it's reverence. The sight of its rounded fenders and split windshield evokes the same quiet pride once seen on the frozen roads of Bastogne or the burning sands of Tunisia. Each surviving truck is a monument, not to destruction but to endurance. In the end, the story of the CCKW isn't about the machine itself, it's about what it represents. Ingenuity, unity, perseverance, a nation's ability to turn its factories into fortresses, its workers into warriors, its machines into miracles. The generals may have ignored it at first, but history did not. Because wars, no matter how vast, are still won one delivery at a time, by those who keep the wheels turning when everything else stops. As the last of the convoys crossed into Germany in 1945, engines growling and tires hissing on wet pavement, the sun broke through the smoke. One soldier leaned out of his truck cab and whispered to no one in particular, "She got us here." And in that simple line lay the entire legacy of the Deuce and a half, an uncelebrated titan that carried an army, fed a continent, and in doing so won a world.